Today, I fire and divorce my husband. I have gotten what I want from him and a better man.
He built an empire, only to lose it all. Betrayed by those he trusted, now he will rise again.
After 17 years of building a company from a spare bedroom into a $100 million empire, Marcus Reed sat in a leather chair across from his own wife and watched her slide a termination letter across the mahogany desk toward him. That moment right there, that single quiet afternoon in a glass office on the 32nd floor, changed everything. Not just for Marcus, but for every single person who had ever doubted him, dismissed him, or decided he was no longer useful to them. This story is going to make your jaw drop, and if you have ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, someone who was supposed to be in your corner no matter what, then buckle up, because what Marcus did next is the kind of thing most people only dream about. Before we get into all of it, hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about real people who refuse to stay down, and you do not want to miss a single one. Let us go back to the beginning, because you cannot understand just how devastating that boardroom moment was without understanding what Marcus sacrificed to get there in the first place. Marcus Reed grew up in a modest household in Columbus, Ohio. His father worked at a steel plant, and his mother was a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm downtown. They were not wealthy people, but they were hard-working, and that value was drilled into Marcus from the time he could understand what the word effort actually meant. He graduated from Ohio State with a degree in business administration, not at the top of his class, but somewhere in the solid middle, carrying more ambition in his backpack than most of his classmates had in their entire future plans combined. He started his first job at a mid-sized logistics company called Hartwell Distribution, handling supply chain coordination. It was unsexy, unglamorous work involving spreadsheets, phone calls, vendor negotiations, and a lot of late nights. But Marcus was meticulous. He was the guy who would stay until 9 in the evening just to make sure one shipment got rerouted correctly. He was the guy who memorized every client preference, every contract clause, every personality quirk of the people he dealt with daily. And it was at Hartwell Distribution that he met a woman named Diana Calloway.
Diana was sharp. There is no other word for it. She could walk into a room, and within 60 seconds she had assessed every person in it, understood the power dynamics at play, and figured out exactly what she needed to say to be taken seriously. She was brilliant with numbers, exceptional at strategy, and had a presence that made people lean forward when she spoke. Marcus was immediately drawn to her, not just romantically but intellectually. She challenged him in ways no one else had. She pushed back on his ideas and made him defend them with evidence, not just enthusiasm. They dated for 2 years, married in a small ceremony in upstate New York, and within another year, they were sitting at a kitchen table with a legal pad covered in notes and a shared dream that felt completely insane but somehow completely right. They were going to build their own company. The business they created was called Meridian Logistics Group. It started with the two of them, a laptop, a printer, and a contact list that Marcus had cultivated over years of grinding at Hartwell. Diana handled the finances and the strategy, while Marcus handled operations and client relationships. They worked 18-hour days, they skipped vacations, they ate dinner at 10 at night and talked about routing optimization and software integrations between bites. There were months where they were not sure they were going to make payroll. There was one particularly brutal winter where they had to take out a second mortgage on their house just to keep the lights on at the office. But they pushed through, and then they pushed through again. And somewhere around the 5th year, something clicked. A major contract with a regional grocery chain brought in enough revenue to hire a real team. Then a partnership with a national pharmaceutical distributor expanded their reach. By year 10, Meridian Logistics Group had offices in 4 states, over 200 employees, and annual revenue pushing past $50 million. Marcus was proud. More than proud, he was fulfilled in a way that is difficult to describe. Every late night, every missed birthday, every moment of doubt had led to something real. He had built something from nothing with the woman he loved, and he believed with complete sincerity that they were building it together in every sense of the word. What Marcus did not see, or perhaps did not want to see, was a gradual but unmistakable shift in how Diana operated once the company hit a certain size. As Meridian grew, Diana began surrounding herself with a new inner circle. She brought in consultants, then made those consultants permanent executives. She restructured the board and filled it with people who had known her professionally before Marcus, people who were loyal to her vision specifically, not to the partnership that had created the company. She started attending investor meetings alone. She made strategic decisions without looping Marcus in first. Marcus noticed, but rationalized it. He told himself that scaling a business naturally created new dynamics. He told himself that Diana was simply leveraging new expertise. He told himself that the occasional coldness he felt in their conversations was just the stress of running a company at this level. He told himself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. By year 16, Marcus had begun quietly documenting everything. Not out of paranoia, but out of a growing instinct that something was being constructed around him that he did not yet fully understand. He kept records of meetings he was excluded from, decisions that were made without his knowledge, and communications from longtime employees who were being let go or pushed out and replaced with Diana's new hires. He was building a picture, and the picture was not flattering. Then came the morning of the termination. Marcus arrived at the office on a Tuesday in late November. He remembers the day because there was fresh snow on the ground, and the city looked unusually quiet. His assistant, a man named Joel Whitaker, who had been with the company for 11 years, met him at the elevator with an expression Marcus described as caught. Joel told him that Diana had requested he come directly to the executive conference room on the 32nd floor before doing anything else. Marcus walked in to find Diana seated at the head of the table. On her left was the company's chief legal officer, a woman named Patricia Haynes, who had been brought in 2 years earlier at Diana's specific recommendation. On Diana's right was Gerald Foss, the chairman of the board, a man Marcus had never particularly trusted, but had tolerated because Diana valued the relationship. Diana did not stand up when Marcus walked in. She did not make eye contact immediately. She waited until he sat down, and then she slid a document across the table, and told him that after a comprehensive review of executive performance and organizational structure, the board had voted to dissolve his operational role at Meridian Logistics Group. She said it in exactly the tone of voice someone uses when they have rehearsed the sentence so many times, it no longer sounds like a human being saying it to another human being. The document was a termination agreement. There was a severance package attached, generous on paper, but surrounded by enough non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses, and liability waivers to effectively silence him and lock him out of the industry for several years. Patricia Haynes began explaining the legal framework of the agreement in a calm, measured voice, while Gerald Foss sat there with the particular brand of silence that belongs to men who have already done what they came to do. Marcus did not sign anything that day. He asked for time to review the documents with his own attorney, which was his legal right, and Diana said that was fine. Of course, whatever he needed. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, looked at his wife of 16 years directly in the face for a long moment, and walked out of the conference room. He called his attorney from the parking garage before he even started his car. He called Joel Whitaker next. Joel, it turned out, had already been building his own file. In the 11 years he had worked as Marcus's assistant, Joel had been quietly watching the same shifts Marcus had noticed, but from a vantage point even closer to the daily machinery of the executive floor. Joel had overheard conversations he was not supposed to hear. He had processed documents that contained information that told a different story than the official narrative. He had made copies of things carefully and quietly, because Joel was the kind of person who paid close attention and believed that documentation was the only thing that separated truth from revision. What Joel had compiled, combined with what Marcus had been tracking on his own, painted a very detailed picture of financial maneuvering that went well beyond a simple power restructuring. There were board communications that suggested the plan to remove Marcus had been in motion for at least 18 months. There were records of equity conversations that had excluded Marcus despite his foundational stake in the company. There were vendor contracts awarded to firms with connections to Diana's new inner circle that had bypassed the standard procurement processes that Marcus himself had designed. Marcus spent 4 weeks doing nothing publicly. He went to his attorney, he met with a second attorney, he met with a forensic accountant, he met with a corporate governance specialist. He was calm, methodical, and thorough in a way that people who had dismissed him as simply the operations guy had apparently never counted on. Then he filed. The lawsuit was not a scorned husband lashing out. It was a carefully constructed legal action targeting multiple areas, including breach of fiduciary duty, shareholder oppression, and specific allegations of financial misconduct tied to the vendor-contract irregularities that Joel's documentation helped establish. Because Marcus had never signed the termination agreement and had never surrendered his equity stake in the company, he retained standing as a founding shareholder, with rights that could not simply be dissolved by a board vote engineered by his own spouse. Diana's legal team responded aggressively, as expected. They attempted to discredit Joel's documentation. They leaned heavily on the non-disclosure agreements that other employees had signed. They tried to characterize Marcus as a bitter ex-husband, attempting to sabotage a company he was no longer qualified to lead. What they did not anticipate was how many people were quietly ready to stop staying quiet. When the lawsuit became public knowledge, something unexpected happened at Meridian Logistics Group. Former employees, people who had been pushed out over the previous 2 years under circumstances they had never publicly questioned, began reaching out to Marcus's legal team. People who had signed non-disclosure agreements began consulting their own attorneys about the scope and enforceability of those agreements. Department heads who were still inside the company began having private conversations about what they had witnessed and what they were personally comfortable being associated with going forward. Joel had made a comment to Marcus during one of their early meetings that became something of a North Star for everything that followed. He had looked at Marcus across a conference table stacked with documents and said quietly but clearly that if they were going to do this, they should make sure every single person who had participated in what was done to him understood the full weight of that participation. Marcus did not take that to mean a vendetta. He took it to mean accountability. And accountability, when pursued with documentation, legal standing, and the patience to let the process work, is one of the most powerful forces a person can deploy. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was extraordinary. As Marcus's legal team began accessing financial records under court order, the procurement irregularities that Joel's notes had hinted at turned out to be substantially more extensive than even Marcus had expected. 3 separate vendors with contracts totaling over $8 million had financial ties to individuals connected to Diana's new executive circle. 2 of those contracts had been approved through an expedited review process that had been quietly modified in the company's internal procurement policy about 14 months before Marcus's termination, a modification that Marcus had never been formally notified of, despite his title at the time technically requiring his signatory involvement. Patricia Haynes, the chief legal officer who had sat silently at the termination meeting, found herself drawn into the proceedings in ways she had clearly not planned for. Gerald Foss, the board chairman, resigned from his position 4 months into the lawsuit, citing personal reasons, which is a phrase that tends to show up when the alternative is something considerably worse. Diana's position within the company she had co-founded and then seized became increasingly untenable. The investor relationships she had cultivated began to shift, as the details emerging from discovery created uncertainty about the governance and financial integrity of the organization. 2 board members who had been part of the original vote to remove Marcus quietly approached his legal team to discuss what cooperation might look like. The divorce proceedings ran parallel to the corporate litigation and were, in their own way, equally consequential. Because Meridian Logistics Group had been founded during the marriage and Marcus had a documented founding role and retained equity, the division of marital assets became extraordinarily complex. Diana's strategy of positioning him as a non-essential executive who had been appropriately managed out of the company began to collapse under the weight of the very documentation that strategy had generated. Every internal communication that referred to him as peripheral was now also evidence of how deliberately that peripheral status had been constructed. 18 months after that quiet Tuesday morning in the 32nd floor conference room, Meridian Logistics Group announced a settlement. The terms were not fully disclosed publicly, which is standard in these situations. But what became known through the financial and business press was that Marcus Reed received a substantial buyout of his equity stake, that several executives, including Patricia Haynes, were no longer with the company, and that the firm had entered into a formal remediation agreement regarding its internal procurement and governance processes. Diana retained operational control of the company, but the version of Meridian Logistics Group she was left leading was significantly smaller, considerably more scrutinized, and missing several of the key relationships and personnel that had made the organization run effectively. The company she had engineered to be hers alone turned out to be significantly harder to run without the foundation Marcus had spent years building beneath it. Marcus used his settlement to do something that surprised people who expected him to retreat into bitterness or simply retire. He started a new company, a smaller operation, more focused, built around supply chain consulting for mid-sized businesses, navigating exactly the kind of growth challenges that Meridian had once faced. He brought Joel Whitaker with him as his director of operations. Within the first year, several former Meridian clients, people who had built relationships specifically with Marcus over the years, found their way to the new firm. He did not rush. He did not grandstand. He did not spend his energy on interviews or public statements designed to wound Diana or make himself look heroic. He simply built again, this time with full control over what he was building, and a very clear understanding of which people were truly in his corner. There is something in Marcus's story that goes beyond the drama of the legal battle or the emotional devastation of the betrayal. There is something in it that speaks to a question a lot of people carry quietly, which is, what do you do when the person who knows you best decides to use that knowledge against you? Diana knew exactly how Marcus operated. She knew he preferred resolution over conflict. She knew he was inclined to rationalize warning signs because he was fundamentally optimistic about the people he loved. She knew he believed in the institution of their marriage and the shared identity of what they had built together. She used all of that knowledge as a map for how to move against him without triggering his defenses until the moment when the movement was essentially complete. And Marcus, to his enormous credit, did not let any of that break him. He felt it deeply. There is no question about that. The people who know him describe the period immediately following the termination as genuinely difficult for him in ways that had nothing to do with money or professional standing. It was the loss of a future he had imagined with someone he had loved. That kind of grief does not resolve on a timeline, and it does not respond to legal victories. But Marcus understood something that many people in similar situations do not. He understood that his best response was not noise, it was not retaliation fueled by anger. It was not a media campaign, or a social media war, or any of the outlets that our culture tends to reward in moments of public grievance. His best response was the slow, careful, methodical work of rebuilding his credibility through action, while simultaneously ensuring that the people responsible for what had been done to him faced the appropriate structural consequences for it. Joel Whitaker's role in all of this deserves its own moment of recognition. Joel was not a dramatic figure. He was not a whistleblower in the cinematic sense of the word. He was simply a man who had worked alongside Marcus for 11 years, who had watched something unjust being constructed around a good person, and who had made a quiet decision to pay attention and to be useful when the moment arrived. The fact that Marcus's case was as strong as it turned out to be owes a significant amount to Joel's disciplined, undramatic commitment to documentation and loyalty. There is a lesson in that for anyone who manages other people or works alongside them. The assistant, the coordinator, the person in the room who everyone assumes is not paying attention. That person is almost always paying the closest attention of anyone. How you treat them, what you reveal around them, and whether you give them reason to feel genuinely valued versus merely useful. Those things matter enormously when circumstances stop being ordinary. Marcus rebuilt. That is the headline. But the subtext beneath that headline is more interesting and more instructive. He rebuilt because he had never actually stopped being himself. Through the humiliation of that conference room, through the unraveling of his marriage, through the months of legal proceedings and discovery and negotiation, he remained the person who had built the company in the first place. Meticulous, patient, relationship-focused, unwilling to cut corners, inclined to trust, but no longer inclined to confuse trust with blindness. The new company he built is quieter than Meridian. It will probably never reach $100 million in revenue. That is not the point. The point is that it is entirely his. Every value it reflects, every relationship it honors, every decision it makes, those things flow from who Marcus Reed actually is, rather than from the fractured compromise of trying to hold together something that had been quietly engineered to exclude him. Diana runs what remains of Meridian Logistics Group. By all accounts, she is a capable executive. The company has stabilized after a difficult period. She moved on personally as well, which is her right and her business. But here's the thing that tends to sit with people when they hear this story in full. The version of Meridian that Diana has today, the reduced, scrutinized, relationship-depleted version, is a direct consequence of the choices she made when she decided that winning mattered more than the partnership that had made winning possible in the first place. You cannot hollow out the foundation of something and expect the structure to hold its original shape. You cannot remove the person who built the relationships and expect those relationships to remain. You cannot treat loyalty as a tool to be borrowed and returned and expect it to function the same way afterward. Marcus understood those things deeply because he had lived them from the building side. Diana learned them, eventually, from the other direction. The story of Marcus Reed and Meridian Logistics Group is not ultimately a story about revenge, even though it gets described that way sometimes in the corners of the internet where people enjoy a clean narrative arc. It is a story about what happens when someone with genuine substance is forced to demonstrate that substance under conditions designed to strip it away. It is a story about the kind of loyalty that does not announce itself until the moment it is most needed. It is a story about how the slow, undramatic choice to do things right tends to outlast the faster, louder choice to do things strategically at someone else's expense. Marcus sat across from his wife in that conference room and watched her try to erase 17 years of partnership with a piece of paper. What she didn't account for, what the board did not account for, what Patricia Haynes and Gerald Foss and the entire carefully assembled inner circle did not account for, was that you cannot erase someone who knows exactly who they are. He walked out of that room. He made 2 phone calls. He built everything back. And in doing so, he made sure that every single person who had been part of what was done to him came face to face with exactly what they had chosen to do. That is what accountability looks like when it is pursued with patience, precision, and an unshakable sense of self. If this story hit you in the way I think it might have, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now, because there are more stories just like this one waiting for you right here. Stories about people who were counted out and came back, people who turned the worst moments of their lives into the foundation of something extraordinary. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and we will see you in the next one.